It's really about reclaiming your power, like the power of your body, which is like, what a powerful transition that our bodies are going through right now. It is about like getting back in touch with and feeling liberation. It's about getting back in touch with the sensations of your body. We've been trained to go into our minds, and that's our default. But what I'm hearing is that really what this process does is it helps us to kind of nudging us to reverse that process and really embrace what our bodies are telling us to naturally do. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Power in the Pause podcast. How are you doing today? As a reminder, please do not forget to hit subscribe so that you do not miss a single episode, because I release one every single week. And you would do me the biggest favor if you would please leave a 5-star rating so that more people will find this podcast. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my guest, Lisa Boate, to today's episode. Hello, Lisa. How are you?
Hi, I'm very hot. And I mean that temperature wise. So it's feeling like 36 degrees Celsius here, which is like high 90s in Fahrenheit, I guess, and very humid. So I know the cold weather is coming soon. So I'm just trying to be grateful for this heat and humidity that we have at the moment. Yeah. So that's how I am. Grateful and warm.
Yes. And let's not confuse the temperature conversation, at least yet, with our topic today, you guys. So I met Lisa, what was it? Maybe a month ago, and we just totally hit it off. And I had this epiphany when we were talking, and I was like, oh my God, Lisa, I'm like, you've got to come on the podcast because I have just this vision, because what Lisa talks about has to do with something that all of us ladies go through I'm going to go on a limb and say it starts in our mid 40s, maybe a little bit earlier, but Lisa's the expert. She'll talk about it more better than I am. For sure. Yeah. And something we all go through, and that is menopause, perimenopause as well. And so Lisa is our expert who is here today to talk with me about finding the magic in menopause, which sounds counterintuitive because I don't know that any woman looks forward to that time of their life, but we're going to shed some new light on that today. So Lisa is the founder of Liberated Menopause Consulting and Coaching, which is dedicated to empowering women through transformative education and advocacy. With a background in education and a passion for creating menopause-empowered workplaces, Lisa brings expertise as a menopause coach, consultant, and she is also the host of her own podcast, Transforming 45. She is a mom to 2 late-teen boys. She's a wife, and she navigates life with her spirited Wheaten Terrier mixes by her side. I love fellow dog moms. Lisa finds joy in nature, whether gardening or enjoying the lake, and is committed to helping women embrace vitality and navigate midlife with resilience and empowerment. So, Lisa, let's dive in. Obviously, this isn't something that you jumped into in your 20s. This is something that revealed itself later in life. So I'd love for you to share how it was that you found your power in a pause moment to do this work that you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm really glad that all your listeners are here because I know menopause is starting to have a bit more of a moment and people are starting to think and talk about it more, but there's so much still that people don't know and understand. And so these conversations are so important. So thank you for making this space for that. And I had a really big pause in my life so you mentioned I had a background in education. I was an educator for 20 years. And the last decade of my career, I provided professional development and coaching for other educators. That was my role. And it was time where I had a very visible leadership role within our board. And I was doing a lot of work that was pushing back against a system that I never felt like I belonged in. And so there was a lot of reflection that happened for me during that time. And it was reflection on why had I never felt like I belonged? It was because I had major issues with the systemic structure of education, and I was always pushing back against it. And for a long time, I felt like I had hope that I could actually make some change. Hmm. And then one day, after, a series of lots of events, and like most people that we have conversations with, COVID happened, which also really gave me time to evaluate, how do I want to live the rest of my life? And I didn't want to live the rest of my life feeling like I didn't belong and exhausted and depleted all the time. And so I initially took a leave from education, where I spent, the first part of that time in deep pause, just letting myself bake bread. And there was something really ancestral and healing in that process for me. It let me be a mom in ways that I had never been able to be before. It let me, get my hands in the dirt and get creative. And there was this moment after I'd been sort of on my leave for about a month and a half. And my youngest son looked at me and he was like, "Oh, there you are."
Wow.
And yeah, so it was this moment of finally having dropped all of the shields and all the armor that I'd been wearing for so long. And when he articulated it in that way so clearly, I knew that it was time for a big change. And so I knew that I would never be going back to education as I had traditionally been, but I loved the coaching element of the work that I did. So I started really thinking about, how can I keep doing that? And at the same time, my kids were in their late teen years, and I was starting to think about the empty nest. And I was starting to experience perimenopause symptoms that I didn't even realize that that's what it was. And so I took my menopause coaching certification course. And in doing that, I was so overwhelmed by everything we do not know about how the female body functions, that all of those pieces came together. I just felt like this is the work of women of our generation. That's how I feel, that every generation of women has had their thing that they brought forward and made progress on. And I feel like this is ours. It's our time to get really educated about how our bodies work and how they can function and how we can have a really good health span and live with vitality in this phase of life.
I love that. And that this is something that I love extending my platform to you and for you to use your voice, because I think that, I even think I had mentioned when we had spoken that, to me, like, menopause is kind of like that M word that a lot of people don't want to address or talk about, because they think that that means you're old, or it thinks that it means that like life is over, and it really doesn't. So I would love for you to shed some light for our audience today around, like, what is perimenopause? What is menopause? Like, I'm really big on just educating people on what things mean. So if you could share some wisdom around that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an important place to start. I mean, you said at the beginning, I'm sure you didn't start this in your 20s. I wish that I had.
Right.
Because the earlier we have this information, the more we can put preventative strategies in place, but more on that later. So perimenopause is the period of time where estrogen and progesterone start to fluctuate in your body. And that actually starts to happen in your mid-30s.
Oh.
So, yes. Yeah, which is really important information. And at this point in time, it often also is intersecting with new motherhood. So there's, all of the exhaustion that happens, the aches and pains that you start feeling in your body, all of those things, we've attributed them to, well, this is just new motherhood. And in many cases, at this time when women are having children sort of in their mid to late 30s, it actually also is perimenopause. So it's important to know that, so that you don't just feel like you're not performing the way you want to. There's real reasons why that is happening. And for all of us to know that there are the shifts and changes that happen with estrogen and progesterone impact every single system in your body. So it impacts brain health and function. It impacts allergies. Often people will start noticing that they have increased sensitivity. It impacts bone health and strength. It impacts muscles and joints. It impacts, the things that we often hear about are hot flushes and night sweats. And those are vasomotor events because it's impacting your cardiac function. So estrogen is like this miracle protective hormone that we have in our bodies. And as it starts to fluctuate, we start noticing these things. And so the way I try to position this for women is that these are signals from your body that things are changing and it's time to do things differently. It doesn't mean that you just now have this diminished health imperative in front of you. That's not the case. It just means you have to start listening to your body and giving to it in ways that you probably haven't been, probably ever in your lifetime. Right. And that's where the magic lies. And again, we can come back to that. So that is perimenopause, and perimenopause can last up to a decade. Menopause itself is really one day. So menopause is the day you realize you haven't had a period in 12 months. So that's the indicator that you are now post-menopausal, right? So it's that, like, menopause is it's the cessation of having a period. And then we go into post-menopause. So post-menopause, sometimes symptoms start to alleviate themselves. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it takes a year or two for the body to adjust to this new hormone reality. Every single woman's journey through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause is completely different. So that's why it is so important to get yourself connected with skilled practitioners who really know and understand the female body. And that's where this process can be challenging, because there is not a lot of skilled practitioners that have deep understanding of the female body at this transformation.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot going through my head right now, which I have to imagine people listening are in the same place right now. So what I'm hearing is that it's about paying attention to your body, because the inside, right, the composition is shifting.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of times we make excuses or we ignore things thinking, oh, it'll pass, but yet it doesn't. So talk a little bit more about, like, what are some of the signs that people maybe that you hear commonly are not paying attention to, or where should, again, because everybody's journey is going to look a little bit different. It's not like you're going to check every box of symptom, but how does what can people look for? Because in my head, I'm going like, wait, am I post? Am I peri? Where am I on this scale right now?
Yeah. So the hallmark of being in perimenopause is that you still have a period, right? So the cycle might be changing. It might be getting a little bit longer. It might be getting shorter. You might have lighter periods. In my case, lucky me, they are getting heavier. And part of that is during perimenopause, when estrogen is fluctuating, when your body is going to release an egg, because there are fewer and fewer and fewer eggs, it takes more and more effort and energy. So there's this like estrogen dump that happens now to force an egg to come out. And in my case, that is resulting in super heavy periods. So that's one indication that people might not think about, because menopause, we just think about that like, oh, I don't have a period anymore. And that's not the case. So you might notice, just pay attention to what the changes in your cycle are. Night sweats is often one of the first things that people notice. Like, they suddenly wake up in a lake of their own making and are like, what is happening to me?
Right.
Brain fog and word recall are also telltale signs that people don't necessarily know. So, I started noticing it in that tasks that used to take me no time, or I never needed to write anything down in a calendar. I always had all that information in my brain. And suddenly I couldn't do that anymore. I needed to actually write things down. And so brain fog and word recall are also really a big part of that mix. And I find that when I'm talking to women about the symptoms of perimenopause, I often see this like shift in their eyes because so many women just feel like, I thought I was going into the early stages of dementia. Like that conversation I've had with multiple women, or they thought, I just thought I was like slowing down, that aging was impacting my body and that this is just how it's going to be now. And when we start educating women about the truth of what's happening in their bodies, there's this light that comes back on because we realize, oh, this is what it is. And so there are things that we can do about it. And that's where the magic really is, because at this point in time, our body is forcing us back into our bodies because many of us have had lots of experiences over our lifetimes that maybe made it feel like our bodies weren't the safest place to live. And we live in our brain, or we live just a little bit outside, right? And this calls us back into our bodies in really beautiful and powerful ways when we claim it that way and say, this is now my time to give to myself, to pay attention, to actually schedule out time that is for me because I have to. It's now a health imperative that I actually take care of myself.
Oh my God, so much is letting in. And it goes back to how I think initially I had said I wanted you to come on to talk about the power of menopause, right? What I'm hearing you say is it's really about reclaiming your power, like the power of your body, which is so like what a powerful transition that our bodies are going through right now. And almost, and I think you even, described this as we were prepping for this episode, but it really, it's like, it is about liberation. It is about like getting back in touch with and feeling liberation. I mean, I talk all about like, everything that I teach and all the work that I do with my clients. It's really all about sensations. It's about getting back in touch with the sensations of your body, because to your point, we've been trained to go up into, I'm pointing to my head, like we've been trained to go into our minds and that's our default. But what I'm hearing is that really what this process does is it helps us to kind of nudging us to reverse that process and really embrace what our bodies are telling us to naturally do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love talking about this as a time of great liberation. Like I do not, and I always preface it by saying, I am not telling you that there aren't going to be hard things about this. There are physical things that are uncomfortable. There is grief that goes along with this stage as well. And I don't want to gloss that over because it's really important, especially in, you and I are both in North America and the youth obsessed culture that exists here. And suddenly we're in menopause, where for a long time, the story of this was like, well, you're not valuable anymore, right? You're all the roles that we value, like mom of young kids, young academic at one point, or young professional. All of those roles are shifting and changing for us. And there is grief in that, like the process I went through in releasing a career that you and I were just talking before we started about. Both of us have children who are starting university. And in my case, I'm an instant empty nester. Both of my boys are going at the same time. And there's so much grief in being on the other side of everything I ever imagined for my life. So that exists, and it's important to acknowledge it. And the liberation comes from knowing that those roles are not who I am. They were roles that I played. And now I get to be truly, authentically myself. And so it can feel like, I had one person said to me, I just feel like I'm flailing because all of the structures that we have for how we should be moving through life sort of go away. And it's like, well, now what?
Right.
And so that's why these conversations are so important. And it's what I do on my podcast too, is like developing the narrative about what it is to be a vital, powerful, sexy, like all of those things. We get to reclaim all of those pieces of ourselves, which is exciting.
Yeah. It absolutely is. Like I don't know that I've ever thought about it this way before, which is so incredibly refreshing and why I'm so incredibly glad that you're here to shed light and bring this conversation to light, because I do think it's really important, and I know it's important to a lot of my listeners, given that I know that they're in this place right now at some place on the spectrum of menopause. And so, one of the things that I know you and I have also talked about that I want us to address today in our conversation is, I used to talk about how when I was in corporate, I was going through a divorce and there were no resources, no best practices, or there wasn't leniency given, that I was going through this really hard time of my life. And, menopause to me is one of those times of your life where it is going to impact how you show up at work, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur or working in corporate. So I'd love for you to share some of your wisdom around, when these types of symptoms creep up, how is it that people can manage this, in the workplace, or, those random moments where things just all of a sudden just like hit you, whether it's a hot flash or another symptom. Like, what the hell are we supposed to do about it? How are we supposed to manage that? And what's the conversation?
Yeah, that's really important because that is the other part of my work, is helping organizations create menopause empowered workplaces, because women at this phase are incredibly valuable employees and leaders, whatever role you're playing in your workplace or organization. You have decades worth of institutional knowledge about how things work. You have relationships, you have so much knowledge about what it is that you do. And 1 in 10 women are leaving the workforce because of unsupported menopause symptoms.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And that comes from...
and that's only going to grow, right?
Yes.
I would imagine.
More women. Yeah. And there's some so that statistic is from, I'm Canadian. So the Menopause Foundation of Canada released a report last October of 2023 that had a lot of statistics. And that was the most staggering one to me. And I also saw my own story in that. Like, looking back now, I realized how much perimenopause was playing a role in how I was feeling in the last few years. It doesn't mean I would change my decision, but it would have been nice to have made informed choices about what was happening to me and how it was impacting me at work. And so when I have conversations with women, it's often around like that brain fog component. It is about word recall. It is if they're going to give a presentation and suddenly a hot flush comes and you're drenched. It's not opportune, nor does it help with your confidence level when you're going in front of a group of, other human beings. And so the place that really needs to start is policy. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be policy around some things as simple as just being able to control the temperature in your workspace. So there are some really simple fixes that can be implemented right away. Things like that, things like having ice packs available. Because if you are having a hot flush, an ice pack on the back of the neck is almost like instant relief. So there can be elements that are as simple as that, up to and including things like menopause leaves, where you get 6 months, a year, and then you can come back after you have had the opportunity to do a little bit of healing and figure out what's going to work for you going forward. So there is a huge range. And one of the things that I teach is around just a communication strategy. And that is knowing and naming. So when you wake up in the morning, if you happen to have a raging headache, which often is caused by that fluctuating estrogen or progesterone in the body, instead of ignoring it and trying to push it away and saying like, nope, I'm not going to let this impact my day. Because the truth is, whenever we do that, what happens?
Oh, it's right? I hate the whole, like, I think I even wrote a post about it. I hate the like, oh, I'm going to power through. Like, no, is that? That's not power. That doesn't make you strong. It makes you, to my opinion, like powering through means that you're actually weak and you're not surrendering to the message your body's sending you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we try to power through, the dominoes always fall anyway. Yes. Right? Like, it's because things are not going to go the way you want them to because you don't have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
So instead of powering through, acknowledge it, give yourself space that day to communicate it to whoever you need to communicate it to. So if it's your manager, if it's your supervisor, if it is your colleagues and coworkers, and just say, hey, this is what's happening for me today. This is how you might see it show up in the work that I'm doing. This is a safe way that we can communicate about it, and like have a sentence or even just a word that you all agree on that feels good for everybody. And this is where I might need some help. And so that's a communication strategy that, yes, I come at it from the menopause lens, and it's something that's effective for everybody in a workspace, because the more we can be honest about what's happening with us, the less tension there is, right? Because if I go in there with this raging hormone headache and I don't respond to people the way I normally do, the other people that I'm working with are like, oh, what did I do? What's because we do that as humans, we personalize and internalize everything. Right. This makes it really clear, like, this is what's happening, this is what I need, and this is where I'm going to need some help.
And it has nothing to do with you.
And it has nothing to do with you. Yes, exactly.
So interesting. So Lisa, but what if there's somebody listening right now who has been listening to our conversation today? Like, what is a final piece that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah. So the final piece is that you don't have to accept that this is just how your body is now. There are things you can do, and it's the core four. And I'm going to say it, and people are going to be like, really? That's what it is for everything. And yes, it is sleep, stress management, movement, and nutrition. And having those pieces in place make a huge difference in how we experience perimenopause and menopause. And that's why I said earlier, I wish I knew about this in my 20s, because the earlier you have those routines in place, the better outcomes generally you have in moving through perimenopause and menopause. And that said, it is never too late. And just start with something small. And the thing that I always start with my clients is resistance training. Weight training, the research is really clear that it has the biggest impact on all of your health goals, full stop. Yep. And when you're starting with resistance and weight training, you sleep better because your body is being challenged in ways that it hasn't before. There's endorphin release, which impacts stress management. You want to eat differently because you have to, because your muscles need repairing. So it's sort of like the linchpin that I structure everything else around. So that's it. But there's real strong evidence that it can have a really healthy impact. I am never someone who's going to say you should or you should not. My piece of information is find out all the information you can and then make an informed choice for yourself.
That's such great advice. And I mean, I have to seriously echo the weight training. It has been a game changer for me. I am 100% perimenopause, which I hate admitting up until this episode, but it has been a massive game changer for me in every area of my life. And the days that I don't lift or do resistance training, I feel different. I feel off. My mood is different. My sleep is very different. This is coming from someone who, again, like I could run on the treadmill and drop weight and change my body like that. And 2 years ago, that shit stopped, and I had to start. I was like, what the hell is happening? And by adding in the weights, it has been a dramatic game changer in every aspect of my life. I think it's important that we have the information and then we make informed decisions with experts and what works for each and every one of us. So Lisa, I appreciate you and the work that you do. And I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you. So please share where people can connect and get more info, please.
Yeah. So on Instagram, you can find me at lboate, and my website is liberatedmenopause.ca. And that's where you can find all my contact information. I have a couple of programs just coming out. One is a group coaching program, From Loss to Liberation, Embracing Life Beyond the Nest, which is a really comprehensive look at midlife transformation. And then I have a little mini program that looks at the top 5 symptoms of how menopause impacts us in the workplace and what you can do about it. So website is a great place to go to get all that information.
Amazing. Lisa, thank you so much. It was such an honor and pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was so fun.
Amazing. You guys, thank you for being here with us and spending your time. I know that it is valuable, and I believe that this has been an incredibly valuable and informative conversation that we've had. I know that I have learned a ton of new information, and that is always what my goal is with every episode, is to arm you with information that is going to inspire you to see the power in the pause, and in this case, the power in menopause. So I hope that you enjoyed exploring the magic of that transition that we go through in our life. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, sending you so much love and light. Mwah. Bye, everybody.